Well, a very pleasant evening to you once again, and welcome to the program Walter Rodney Groundings. On tonight's program, I'll be talking with Mr. Colwyn King, the newly elected president of the Guyana Teachers Union, and we'll be looking at the new leadership and the way forward for Guyana's teachers. Welcome to the program, Mr. King.
Thanks a lot, and a pleasant good evening to the viewing public and to all the teachers across the length and breadth of Guyana.
Well, you have been elected to the leadership of the Guyana Teachers Union, beating your nearest opponent, I understand, by some 500 and odd votes. Now, what is it about Colwyn King that would have made these teachers place such great trust and faith in you?
Over the last 4 years as regional vice president, I believe in an issue that is ripe in our land, that the teacher must be judged on two bases: the teacher's rights and the teacher's responsibility. And over the last 4 years, I've been emphasizing the chapter 3901, that is, the teacher's rights and responsibility as it relates to the environment in which they work, and if it is conducive to teaching and learning, and if it poses any danger to their lives and limb. And I was instrumental in allowing many schools, or bringing many schools into the rightful operation. That a few to name is Friendship Secondary in East Bank, the Charleston Secondary School, Winford Garden, St. Winifred's, St. John's College in Georgetown, Bijival on the east coast of the Marara, Blade and all, in terms of it getting down. Because I remember visiting that school, it was written on the wall that teachers should walk with the water and that they should use the toilet at home. And immediately I got the education officer and the teachers. The education officer was then Mr. Inderjeet, and he refused to recognize the laws. And the said day, the staff were removed from the school and the students were sent home. And that was the closing of Blade and all. And there are many other schools across the length and breadth of Guyana that I was instrumental in making sure that the teachers' rights, and at the same time I was preaching that they should adhere to their responsibilities. And I think that has been responsible for my accession to the office of President of the Guyana Teachers Union.
So it's your own diligence and commitment to seeing that teachers get their rights. Well, you mentioned something about the laws in relation to schools and teachers. What are some of the things that are mentioned in the laws that teachers should, be made comfortable in the school environment?
I want to emphasize that the same law that says to a teacher, notes a lesson, scheme of work, journal, get to school on time, how to mark the register. And over the years, the Ministry of Education has been emphasizing on those laws as it relates to the teacher's responsibility. And I agree with the Ministry of Education. But what I disagree with the Ministry of Education, that the way they emphasize the teacher's responsibility, the teacher's rights has always been hidden in the background. And the same book that described the teacher's responsibility also emphasized on the teacher's rights. And I want to address some of those rights. 90% of the schools, or when I say 85, I've given them the 5% doubt. 85% of the schools in Guyana are zinc roof. And the law clearly states that all zinc roof shall be closely boarded. What it means then, that in 1944, when this law came into being, when we moved from shingle into zinc, they recognized, the medical personnel, the environmental personnel recognized then that having zinc roof building and not closely corroborated will increase the stress on teachers. All these years after the 1944, there are a number of schools in Guyana that the school building are not closely boarded. nursery, primary, secondary, and even in tertiary levels. And you find that the ability to learn is reduced, especially between the 11 and 2 o'clock period when the sun is in its glory. And the law clearly defines that all zinc roof buildings should be closely boarded. I emphasize also that stress is one of the greatest causes of death in our world today. Stress can cause elephantitis. Stress brings on cancer. Stress can bring blindness. And our teachers are allowed to go through the stress on a daily basis. So one, the first aspect, that all zinc roof should be closely boarded, has been ignored for a number of years. He said that no school also should operate without running water. I want to call a named school, Grove Primary, with approximately 1,700 children. And I name Grove in a particular way because when the Guyana Teachers Union addressed the way forward in terms of working to rule, the education officer was in great joy so she can get her teachers for their notes and their scheme of work and whatnot. But I mentioned Grove in that there are 1,700 children attending that school, and there's no functioning toilet, and there's no running water. But if a Chinese restaurant that will have a majority between 15 and 30 person at a time is without running water, that Chinese restaurant is ordered to close down. That Chinese restaurant is given a letter to get his act together. But we have several education institutions where we have 500, 600, 1,000, and I mentioned 1,700 of our nation children plus teachers operating on a daily basis without water and without toilet. Are we saying that the law should be applied to one and not the other?
Well, I mean, that's a problem. The conditions of work for teachers is one serious problem that I know. And the question of, basic amenities, facilities in schools is a tremendous problem. You have also the problem of the ability of the school management to deal with the expenses because of the kinds of grants.
No, you see, I don't want to deal with grants. And let me tell you why I don't want to deal with grants. I believe when a man should honor his word. And I recall in 1997, and when this was mentioned, I wonder if they know what they were saying. President Bharat Jagdeo said in 1997, when there was the election campaign going, he said that teachers, and he mentioned school should not collect no contingency fee because the government have enough money to run schools. I repeat, the president of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana stated in 1997 that the school should not collect any contingency fee because the government have enough money to run schools. The Minister of Education and the then Chief Education Officer, Mr. Ed Caesar and Mr. Dr. Henry Jeffrey, went on national television on a GINA program in 2001 and stated that teachers should not collect money in schools, and his words in tantamount brought out that teachers are thieves.
Okay.
So in essence, based on what has been stated, the government have enough money to run schools, and emphasize that teachers, there is a guideline in how teachers should operate. Teachers are not cleaners, teachers are not money collectors for school, and they're saying teachers should not handle money in school. So it is not the Guyana Teachers Union problem, and I dare say, as a representative of the teachers, it is not the teachers' money for the financing of school. The teacher's responsibility is to turn up to work, prepare for work in terms of notes, scheme, getting their journal done, getting on school on time, and working in an environment that is conducive to teaching and learning, and working in an environment that will not pose any danger to their lives nor limb.
But I mean, you're saying that, but school does have to be managed. And in Region 4, for instance, I know that the allocation for this year was $365,000. And Region 4 is all the way up the Mobley Sunday Highway going all around to...
You see, there's a difficulty. There's no cure for ignorance.
Yes.
And probably the only cure for it is death. When you're dead, your ignorance is gone. And I want to say this in very strong language. Botswana and Singapore recognize the importance of education for the development of their nation. Guyana recognizes the importance of spending billions on guns and preparing an army and a police force to war against its citizens, and recognize that education is not important. So the eventual end analysis for Guyana's dilemma is the neglect of education. And the union's position is simple. If you decide that you're not going to spend enough on education, we'll have to build more jail, we have to spend more money on crime, and we need to develop a greater capacity to deal with corruption, because corruption is in every sector of our society. And we can say it's in the army because they lose the guns. We can say it's in the police force because they're taking away people's visa based on corruption. We can say it is in the customs and exile department because there's a customs scam. We can say it's in the government because we recognize that people are exporting dolphin. So corruption is in every level of society. And to deal and to eradicate corruption, we need to have an educated workforce and an educated society. And if, as the president states, the president of the Republic of Guyana state, that Guyana needs only about 900 teachers a year, so we'll train about 3,000 teachers, and they need only 800 nurses, and we'll train 2,000. Then his mechanism of dealing with the problem is train much more, but the experienced, qualified, and educated ones are going, train more. Let them go, we can train more. That is not the answer to Guyana's problem. The answer is addressing the educational needs of Guyana, and one of it is dealing with teachers, paying teachers properly. And not only salary is necessary in dealing with the crisis that Guyana is in. One of the main issues in dealing with it, and which the government of the day and the Ministry of Education has not paid any heed to, and the call of the Guyana Teachers Union is in dealing with other issues other than salary, that the BEAMS program, that this government state, when they were applying for that grant in terms of grant and the loan dealing with BEAMS, which clearly states that there are other non-financial things that can be given to teachers, and one of them is outlet. And I can give you the scenario how Dr. Henry Jeffrey and Mr. Bash dealt with teachers with outlet. The final analysis is that unless we prepare to deal with the educational needs, and I particularly say this, we're not building new schools, because soon there will be no teachers in those new schools. And we recognize in Essequibo there are some big fancy buildings, but very few students inside, and the same dilemma with teachers. And unless we address Guyana educational needs as it relates to the teachers' enumeration and keeping our qualified trained teachers in Guyana, soon we'll have tremendous buildings. We have well-orchestrated programs such like BEAMS, but there'll be no teacher to administrate them.
All right, well, you're the new president of the union. Over the years, the government has found it necessary to treat the union with scant regard. And they have been imposing salaries upon teachers for the past 4 years or more. What do you see your leadership achieving in relation to this kind of attitude of the government to the union and to teachers in general?
I want to say this, that there's a new breed of teachers out there. And I find myself one of them, that I'm not prepared to stand back. I'm not a stand back person. I'm not a person that believe in the shove down aspect of society. I believe in fairness. I believe in justice. I believe that there is sacrifice that needs to be made for changes to occur. I recognize I've been touching on toes, and justly so. I recognize that the government of the day, instead of dealing in a line of democracy, as a very dictatorial and big brother boss attitude. But the Guyana Teachers Union is going to pave a way forward. In February 13th and 15th, we met with the HPS, and to date, 3 months and today 4 days, the HPS has not found it good or have the common courtesy or exhibit any measure of professionalism in terms of its response, in terms of a call, in terms of a letter to the Guyana Teachers Union. The Guyana Teachers Union have paved the way forward, and whatever it takes, the Guyana Teachers Union will act. And no one, and I wish that the Ethnic Relations Commission, the Private Sector Commission, and all the various groups can recognize the Guyana Teachers Union's patience. And our patience is about the end. And our action has commenced. We are going to work to rule. There will be several stress days, and there will be more actions. I believe the government would have been wise. This is an election year, and would have treated in great wisdom the Guyana Teachers Union with a sense of respect. But they have decided that they will use their propaganda machine, which I think of all the propaganda machines there is in Guyana, the PP has the best. And there's no question about that. But I'm a man, not a propaganda, but dealing with the facts. And so, the way forward as it's paved, I recognize that Martin Luther King loses his life for the freedom of his people and the freedom of the world. Mahatma Gandhi, after crying and crying and crying, his own destroy him. Today, we are living in a society when one opens its mouth to speak, there is an organized, and I will want to say, a lot supported by the administration of the day, judicial killing. But God has designed the day for man to die. And how I'll die, that's not a problem to me. The problem before me is simply this: that whatever is stake, as a leader of the Guyana Teachers Union, I am prepared to fight. And the government of the day has put the Guyana Teachers war back to the wall. And a snake only bites when he has nowhere to go. And if biting is my only way out, I'll bite.
But I mean, what you're saying there, really, I mean, that's your perception of things. Teachers have demonstrated that even in public service, they're very unwilling to take action in their own interest. How do you see yourself being able to motivate them to take this kind of action that you're putting forward?
We're on a campaign, and we have been in Essequibo, Berbice, and Demerara. We are dealing right now with the branch officers and our shop stores in varying schools. We're pointing out to each of them as we move to the issue of work to rule, the various stages. And I believe that creating the groundwork and the networking system, every school will be affected. And I know the momentum will build. It will build. And the faith and the enthusiasm that is built by the new leadership will take its course. And not only that, the teaching fraternity, I believe, will change. But as a nation, as we obey and observe the laws, Guyana will change. The Guyana Teachers Union is simply obeying the laws as we go on work to rule.
You know, I get the sense that teachers believe that they've elected the leadership of the union and that everything else rests with that leadership. What is the role of the teacher in dealing with issues that affect him or her on a daily basis? I mean, in terms of the union, the membership of the union, do they have any role to play in that regard?
Yes. The teacher has a right, and I want to start with the teacher has a right to recognize the system to refuse to work in it. And I want to mention some other system. If the school fence is not right, the teacher has the right to refuse to work in that compound. If the grass is over 3 inches, the teacher has a right not to work in that compound. If the compound has shrubs and bush and rubbish, the teacher has a right to not to work in the compound. That's what the law says.
But, you know, we're dealing with a government that has shown that it's very vindictive and that, you know, well, Dr. Roger Luncheon only last night on television was saying that he's not going to bargain under duress after since February 15 meeting with the union and refusing to even respond in any way to the request by the union to have a further meeting with the president. Now, how do these people really rationalize their own actions in relation to people's concerns?
You know, the government say they're democratic. And it is highly questionable with Dr. Luncheon's statement. But I simply respond this way, that the Guyana Teachers Union will not move because the government of the day and the Ministry of Education have given us several promises. They put it in writing and they break it. They tell you in words and they break it. They sit down and talk to you beautifully and then they break it. How can you trust a group, your leader, who you cannot even take the written word seriously? How can you deal with a group of people who the laws of the land they're breaking with impunity? How can you sit one day and honor a man, Hubert Nathaniel Critchlow, for his contribution, and you making him an hero, and the very next month the work he has done you're destroying. You're trying to break up trade unions. You know, what lawlessness? What can you how can you describe this? The time has come when I believe that every Guyanese, and I want to share a little story with you. And I'll call the story The Mousetrap. And I'd like the nation to follow this story. In The Mousetrap, there are several characters. I call the farmer Guyana. I'll call the cow the government. I'll call the wife, the farmer's wife, the education system. I'll call the mouse, representing the teachers. I'll call the chicken, parents. I'll call the pig, other sectors of society. And now see the story. A mouse got up one day and peeped into the farmer's barn, and he recognized the farmer and his wife opening a beautiful package. He thought to himself then, there's got to be cheese. But after enjoying the joy of having cheese that night, he said to himself, let me look again. And in looking, he recognized it was not cheese, but that of a mouse trap. So he ran out to the farm. He said to the chicken, there's a mouse trap in the house. The chicken said, that's not my concern, that's your problem. He then went to the pig. The pig said, oh, that's your mouse trap, don't bother me. Anyway, I recognize it, buddy, I'm going to pray for you. He ran to the cow. The cow said, that won't take a piece of skin off my nose. So the farmer, when the mouse went back to the hole alone that night to face the mouse trap. In the middle of the night, he heard the song of a mouse trap going off. The wife went to see what was wrong, never realizing it was a deadly snake tail the mouse trap has caught. The snake bit her. She was taken to the Georgetown hospital, treated and sent home. But as she got home, a fever persists. The farmer, to treat the fever, the farmer killed the chicken to look after his wife. She didn't get better. Many persons came to see her. So the farmer killed the pig to feed them. She didn't get better, she died. So the farmer slaughtered the cow for the week. It ends by saying, God asks, Cain asks God, am I my brother's keeper? Today's problem, and I want to end by saying the wife was dead, which is education. The cow, the government, the private sector and those in it, which happens to be the pig, the fowl, the parents, and the one that was intended for, the mouse, is still alive. And Guyana, I've lost all of them. The beauty in it is that who are you? The problem in education is all of our problem. The mouse trap couldn't kill the cow, it couldn't kill the pig, it couldn't kill the chicken, it couldn't kill the farmer. The only thing he had the ability to kill was the mouse, but it killed all of them. And what it was intended to kill is still alive.
Alright, well, that's a good note to end on. Time has caught up with us. I must thank you for being on the program, and I look forward to having you on more of these discourses so that the teachers and the general public could be kept abreast of what is happening in relation to the Guyana Teachers Union and its, bargaining with government for improvement in the livelihood of teachers in this country. Well, a very pleasant evening to you out there once again, and I do hope that we'll be back together next week when we have another program of Walter Rodney Groundings. A very pleasant evening to you, all Guyanese, and welcome to another program of Walter Rodney Groundings. On June 13 this year, we'll be commemorating the 26th death anniversary of Dr. Walter Rodney, and tonight we will be talking about Walter Rodney 26 years after, and the whole question of national reconciliation. To deal with the topic this evening, with me on the program is Dr. David Hinds, who is back in Guyana with us, and I would like to welcome you to the program, Dr. Hinds.
Thank you very much, Deon.
26 years after the death of Dr. Walter Rodney, we still are talking about national reconciliation. How relevant is the work of Dr. Walter Rodney to the politics of Guyana today and the whole question of national reconciliation?
Well, I want to start by saying that in societies like ours, where there is deep division along racial lines, the issue of national reconciliation is an urgent issue, always an urgent issue. It's an issue that is never solved. One can have better relations, one can be closer to national reconciliation. One has to always struggle to bring the various races together, and the various groups in the societies together. So in that sense, national reconciliation is a persistent thing. Walter Rodney is important for national reconciliation because if you look at Guyanese politics over the last 60 years or so, certainly since the decolonization period started after the Second World War, there have been two instances during that period when the country made tremendous effort in the direction of bringing about some form of national reconciliation. And we're talking about the 1953 period when the original PPP came into being, and both the leadership and the masses on the ground were united in one effort to bring about the end of colonialism. And then the second period is the period what I would call the Rodney period, and I would like to argue that that period started somewhere around 1973, even before Rodney came back to Guyana. And I'll tell you why I say that. Because in 1973, ASCRI and IPRA, ASCRI, the African organization at that time, and IPRA, the Indian organization at that time, mounted in 1973 a campaign called the Land for the Landless campaign. And we saw for the first time in a long time Indian and Africans people, Indian people and African people, taking united action in relation to the sugar lands that were under dispute at the time. And that was a year before Rodney came back to Guyana. Certainly during 1974 and 1980, Rodney was able to bring to bear his skills, his knowledge of history, his understanding of the Guyanese situation, and of course his charisma, and really took the work started by ASCRI and IPRA to another level, to the point that by 1980, when he was assassinated, the masses of people, Indian and Africans, had begun to move together. And I want to say that that reconciliation continued up until 1992. Many people like to say, oh, well, you know, the WPA died when Walter Rodney died. And that's an insult to Rodney, but also an insult to those who remained as part of the struggle. If you look at what happened between 1980 and 1992, the ideals of Walter Rodney, the whole question of national action, multiracial unity, the question of self-organization among the working people, that continued. And that kind of action was extremely important in the final demise of authoritarian rule in 1992. So I would say the Rodney period from 1973 to 1992 was another moment, and a pivotal moment in terms of bringing the country nearer to some form of national reconciliation. Of course, what has happened since 1992 is that with the return of free and fair elections, we've had the return of the polarization that was there between 55 and 73.
But you're talking about between, let's say, from 74 to the 1980 period of Dr. Walter Rodney, and subsequently to 1992. Now, as a young man growing up in villages, you know, like in Buxton and so on, you always had a sense that many areas were a no-go for Africans, and some areas were a no-go for Indians. And I remember incidents of, for instance, I lost a school teacher who, while walking home from a party at Buxton one night, they were waylaid along one of the Indian villages, and one person escaped. You had several incidents like those taking place. Now, of course, you had the PPP, the PNC, and the sense of deep fragmentation in the society. Now, the WPA, there is contention now whether the role of the WPA in bringing this unity of the people was really one that was manifest. How will you answer the people who are now saying that, well, look, that kind of role is questionable?
Well, I mean, those who are victorious like to write the history, and the PPP fancies itself to be the victors, and so they're attempting to rewrite the history of Guyana. But I dare say that some of us are not going to allow them to do that. And you make a very important point. Prior to 1973, 1974, Dr. Jagan and the PPP could not go into black villages. You know, such as they couldn't go to places like Buxton and Golden Grove and BV, and couldn't go to Linden. And it was the Rodney and the WPA onslaught on the racial division in the country that made it possible for Indian leaders to begin to go into African areas. And that's very, very significant. Of course, those who are propagandizing these days on behalf of the PPP are not talking about that. No, look, I want to pitch this beyond the WPA and beyond Rodney and look at it in the historical development of our society. Because of course there was work done, like I said, before Rodney came back. And what Rodney and the WPA were able to do was to build on the work that was done before. And in societies like ours, there are always what A.U.C. Quina calls meeting and parting. That is, the two races, contending races, there are moments when they meet and there are moments when they part. And there are always openings for meeting. And what the WP and Rodney were able to do was to capture that moment and to make political headway out of it. You see, it was not just unity among leaders. It was unity on the ground among people, bauxite workers and sugar workers struggling hand in hand. And so therefore, I'm stressing that period because I think that period is a great teacher. Is a great example as we confront the present situation. Because I do believe that just as in 1994, the most 1974, sorry, the most urgent question that faced Guyana was the question of national reconciliation. I happen to believe that the most urgent question today that faces Guyana is the question of national reconciliation. And I want to draw on that experience, that historical experience of Rodney and the WPA, to see if there is something there that we can take to help us navigate the situation. And I do believe in that regard that Walter Rodney is still very, very relevant in terms of his teachings. And in terms of his teachings and in terms of the example that he set for struggle.
No, but what was it about Rodney and the WPA that helped them to mold this kind of togetherness? I mean, we see a tremendous difficulty in achieving that kind of, unity in this period under the PPP administration. How was it that the WPA was able to achieve that?
The whole issue in Guyana is a kind of racial insecurity, where both races feel that they do not want to be dominated by the other race. And so therefore, each race reaches for the levers of power as a means of keeping the other side from dominating them. Now, when you have that kind of situation, it is very difficult to have a kind of unity without effort being put into the politics. And so yes, you have the racial insecurity, but going side by side with that racial insecurity is a yearning for a kind of racial unity. And so therefore the political actors of the moment have to have the acumen, have to have the audacity, and have to have the clarity of thought in order to capture that moment as it presents itself. I have no doubt in my mind that if an alternative to the politics that we see today is presented to the Guyanese people, that they will rise to the occasion. The point is that what we have are dominant ideologies, and the dominant ideologies we have now are the supremacist ideology. We have the PPP talking about a certain kind of PPP domination, PPP supremacy based on something called democracy, one person, one vote. Well, democracy in our situation could lead to dictatorship, and he's heading down that road. And so we have that kind of supremacy on the side of those who are governing, and then therefore those who respond with their own brand of supremacy. And so therefore that is what is before the people. And the Rodney vision, the Rodney ideas, in a sense, are drowned out at the moment. And so therefore what we have to do is to struggle for space, political space, so the ideas of Walter Rodney can be put as an alternative before the people.
I'm wondering, because many people who would have benefited from the I always contend that without the WPA and the emergence of the WPA and the contribution that WPA would have made to democracy in Guyana, that they would have not been, well, we would have never had elections in 1992. I see people like Clement Roy and others questioning the whole period and seeming to want to give the idea that it was the PPP that really caused this change to occur. As a man who would have been intimately involved in that period, what is your take on that?
Well, I mean, what's total nonsense. A lot of times when we were on the street taking blows to defend the cause of democracy and promote liberty in this place, I mean, some of the PPP leaders, most of them are hiding in Freedom House. I mean, you know, and it's kind of ludicrous to hear them stand up today as the big Democrats. Now, it was not just about putting out press releases and putting out your newspapers, which they did, and we did, but it was about going on the streets, mobilizing people, and going out there and confronting, if you will, the dictatorship of the time, confronting the situation, arguing for an alternative, putting a clear alternative between people. And that meant jailings, it meant assassinations, it meant beatings, and there's no doubt that we suffered. We didn't want to suffer it alone. We would have loved a lot of times if the PPP were there to take some blows with us. In most cases, they weren't. I'm not saying that they did not play a role, and I don't want to get into this thing of who played a major role. We all played important roles, but history doesn't lie in a certain way. And so therefore, the history is there to show that it was the WPA that was targeted by the rulers of the time, and the WPA was targeted because the WPA presented a clear alternative to the regime at the time. Well, the PPP was waffling about, you know, whether they should give critical support, and so WPA was very clear that this was not a time for critical support. This was a time for critical exposure and getting rid of the kind of cancer that was developing in our society.
Oh, in relation to Walter, we consider that period an achievement, you know, really where the racists came together. They fought against a regime that we saw as imposing conditions that were totally unacceptable to the society. Now, in this era, it seems as though all of that would have been gone. We seem to be more down the road of self-destruction than any other period that I would have experienced as a young man in Guyana. Now, the PPP coming out of that period, understanding the role of multiracial politics in propelling the whole movement towards democracy, isn't it really a contradiction that their entire attitude to democracy seems to be one that is taking us down the same road for which we would have fought to?
Yes, I saw Minister Roy who said that some of us are helping to tear down what we have to build, and he named persons like myself and Takuma Ogunse. And I'm wondering if he is not considering that the PPP itself is tearing down what we all try to build. When we were struggling, we were talking about a society that we all felt in which the races in Guyana would be able to live in harmony. We're talking about a society in which the working people of all races would be given a fair break to help to develop themselves materially. We're talking about a society in which poverty would be tackled. We're talking about a different kind of society from the one in which the PPP has presided over the last 14 years. So I think they are very guilty of, and I'm very glad Minister Roy raised that point, because I think that is what the PPP is guilty of. There's been a lot of you may have seen some writings in the press about an article that I published in the Social and Economic Study, and I was making that point precisely, that I think that what has happened between 1992 and the present is that the major political parties in this country have individually and together dropped the ball, ignore the real problem, and they've tried to find ways around the problem. And in so doing, they've brought the country to the brink of disintegration that we are in today. And I lay the blame more on the PPP, because my examination of the situation, of the period in question, shows that the PPP, as the ones who were quote-unquote elected, were the ones who were in the best position to force for national unity. They had that opportunity in 1992, they had the opportunity in 1997, they had the opportunity in 2001, they have the opportunity right now. And they've dropped the ball, they've totally ignored the problem, and so therefore I hold them principally responsible for the disintegration of the society at the moment. Now, do I believe that they're a lost cause? Absolutely not. Because I think the PPP is essential to any solution in the country. Similarly, the PNC is essential to any solution in the country. Those are the two political parties, whether we like it or not, that represent the vast majority of Guyanese. Now, when I hear the PPP telling the WPA that they should not deal with the PNC, do they realize that they're actually saying that we should not deal with elected representatives of over 40% of this population, most of whom are African Guyanese? Now, how do you look at me, an African Guyanese, and say to me, well, you know, in the interest of country, in the interest of bringing some sanity to this country, I must not have any kind of relations with a party that represent 40% of the people and more, and that represent African Guyanese. It is not easy always to get into alliances and so forth, but we are telling the Palestinians and the Israelis to come together. We were telling Nelson Mandela to get together with de Klerk. We are urging unity all over the world, and we don't want to urge unity here. And the PPP is so disingenuous, because President Jagdeo is saying that he will not meet with any other leader except the PNC leader. Doesn't want to meet with the WPA, doesn't want to meet with ROAR, doesn't want to meet with all the opposition. So the PPP can deal with the PNC, but others must not deal with the PNC. Now, we in the WPA we have thought about this long and hard, and we have come to the conclusion that what is important at this point is national reconciliation. What is important at this point is country. Now, will we let the murderers of Walter Rodney off the hook? No, never. That is a dogma that we have. Do we still hold the PNC responsible for the atrocities that they committed? Yes. But we are talking about a particular juncture in our history when what we need is a coming together of all our forces. We would love to be on the platform with the PNC and the PPP, and we would like the PPP to come. We would invite. I'm inviting the PPP to join us with the PNC and the AFC and all the other Cs, and everyone come on a platform together. That's what we want. National reconciliation for us means a coming together of all the forces. Now, if the PPP saying we're not coming, well, we are prepared to work with those who are interested in national reconciliation.
But this whole question of the country, I mean, during the Barnum era, wouldn't you have had similar questions in terms of looking at the PPP as a primarily racist-oriented party and the WPA trying to forge a different kind of culture? Wouldn't the same questions have been raised about working with the PPP?
Oh, certainly. And people like A.U.C. Kwayana, Walter Rodney himself, especially the African members of the WPA, we were constantly asked, why are you all dealing with the PPP? The same question they ask, you know, and the same arguments we made then, that what is important here is the country and not so much narrow racial politics. And we had to constantly explain to Africans in particular, what is it we were doing, why is it was important to get into an alliance with the PPP and so forth. And just as we did it then, we are prepared to do it now. So you're quite correct. In these kinds of societies, those are the questions that you'll always face. I suppose Moses Bhagwan and Rupert Rupnarayan and so on had to face similar questions from Indians. Why are you aligning yourself with Guyana? Why are you aligning yourself with these Pan-Africanists, these black nationalists, and so on and so forth? And so those are questions will always be raised, and we are not going to allow anyone to dictate for us how we approach the politics. There are certain dogmas that we hold. National unity in terms of racial unity, working class empowerment is very important for us, and we will make sure that whatever we do, those two positions are very firm. Our position on national unity and our position on working class empowerment will always be constant in whatever platform or whatever approach we take.
So, with regards to, again, the Clements Ruiz whole question of Walter Rodney turning in his grave because of the association with the PNC, how will you respond to that kind of?
I will refer to my colleague Andai, who always reminds us that Walter Rodney did not take static positions. He confronted a situation as he saw it. When he came to Guyana, he came with this reputation as a Pan-Africanist, as a black nationalist. And he came to Guyana and he saw that was not the urgent problem. Guyana didn't have a problem of black nationalism or Pan-Africanism. Guyana's problem was a problem of racial disunity. And so Rodney adapted to the Guyana situation. Now, I don't know what positions Rodney would take today. What I do know is that he would look at the concrete situation and he would try to arrive at positions and approaches based on what is before him. And I think that is a very important aspect of the Rodney approach. That is, the Rodney approach is not an approach that is stuck in time. It's an approach that takes into consideration the concrete situation. What are the urgent questions before us? What are the urgent needs of the society? And I think that is how Rodney would have approached it, and that is how we in the WPA are striving to approach it, to ask the questions, what are the urgent needs of the society today, and how best we, armed with the Rodneyite vision and the Rodneyite approach, how we can use that to try to bring some sanity to the situation.
So we're in a situation now where the PPP is tightening its nose around labor, simply trying to snuff out the labor movement, particularly the unions that are representing black people in the country. Their orientation is obviously bent on dividing the country further. Where really will that take us if they continue with this kind of attitude?
I'm afraid that it will take us down the road of racial violence, and I lower my voice because whenever I think about that possibility, I cringe, because it's the last thing we need at this moment. We've come too far as a people. We've done some hard work over a period of time, and we cannot allow the situation to slide down into racial chaos. And I dare say that the PPP seems to be doing everything to provoke that kind of situation. And we ought not to allow them to provoke that kind of situation. We ought not to allow them to succeed with that kind of situation. Because you see, holding on to power has to do with race. If there is no race, then the question of power becomes a different question. We're talking about power that must be seen not in terms of one race holding the levers of power, but of all race feeling that their representatives, whether you like those representatives or not, but both races feeling that their representatives are there at the table to make decisions on their behalf. And so I think the principal task here is to prevent the PPP from provoking the country down the road of racial disunity and racial chaos and racial violence. And the only, at this point in time, the only deterrence to that is to fight every day, every minute of the day, every hour of the day for national reconciliation. First of all, through political settlement before the elections and the government of national unity after the elections.
Well, I think that's a good point to close on. I was just about to ask you, with elections in the air, what are our options? But time has caught up with us, so maybe we'll have to carry on that discussion at some future date. Anyway, thank you very much for being on the program this evening, Dr. Hinds, and I do hope that the work that the WPA has started and the work of Walter Rodney will not really be totally lost. That at some point we can come to the realization that the country needs some form of unity, and really we need to reconcile our differences to move forward. To my viewers out there, I really wish you all a pleasant evening, and we'll see each other next week, Tuesday, same time, same channel.